Great. Good afternoon. I'm sure you're all here to see me.
We are.
Chinese twist.
So we have an amazing session today. We're going to talk about the megatrends going on in the world today. But we actually called this session Rule Breakers because each of the panelists here have been known to make provocative business decisions and break some rules of their own. So let's start off. If each of you can tell us about some of the rules that you've broken and how it's turned out. Marcelo, maybe we can start with you.
Marcelo instantly looked at me. Why did you look at me then?
You've been around a little. You've been around a little longer than me, so you have broken more rules than I have. What a terrible name, our rule breakers. We try not to break the rules. We try to play by the rules, but once in a while we deviate. I think my biggest rule breaker was when I was the CEO of SoftBank, and we were, well, first of all, we're breaking every rule in the world of venture capital when we had the largest technology fund ever created, and we were investing. We were larger than all the venture capital funds put together. But the biggest rule that we broke was there was no interest in SoftBank in Latin America. And it bothered me tremendously being from Latin America, seeing some of the world's best entrepreneurs in our offices in Tokyo, and they were all Chinese, some amazing Chinese entrepreneurs that now founded TikTok, Alibaba, and so on. We had incredible Indian entrepreneurs who completely disrupted the Indian tech ecosystem, and we had some amazing American entrepreneurs. And we never had any Latin entrepreneurs come to visit us from Latin America. And the biggest rule break was, I went to my boss, Masa, and I asked him, what is the GDP of Latin America compared to the rest of the world? Now, it depends what book you read. At the end, we agreed it was 8%. So I said, great, so why don't we grab 8% of the 100 billion that we manage, and we launched the Latin America Technology Fund. And that was a big rule break, because people were not used to, especially Latin American entrepreneurs, were not used to playing the same game that other entrepreneurs have done. And to me, probably that was one of the most important things that I've done in my life, and probably the ones that brought me the highest amount of satisfaction to be able to launch the SoftBank Latin American Fund.
Yeah, and I think those of us in the tech ecosystem in Latin America really have you to thank to put Latin America on the global investors map on that front. So I agree with you. Sir Brunton.
I don't think I've broken any rules. It's a bit like asking somebody if we've broken any laws. You wouldn't publicly admit it. So not rules. I think we've disrupted, and I say we because it's not just me. We've disrupted things. I remember, in answer to your question, that when I joined Saatchi's in the late 1977, it shows you how old I am, that one of the practices, conventions, was that advertising agencies didn't, if they belonged to the IPA, which was the Association of Agencies, they didn't pitch each other's clients. There was a sort of, it was gentleman's rule at that time not to do it. So that was one sort of disruption. A second disruption would be that we grew by acquisition in a people-based industry. And we did that we built Saatchi's with the Saatchi brothers, Tim Bell and others, into the world's largest group. And then did it again when we started in '85 with WPP. So that the unconventional approach there, the disruption was that you could disrupt what were private partnerships in America, which were run in a very sort of closed circle. And then with S4, after 33 years at WPP, building it to the largest agency group in the world, it's starting with a digital-only, data-driven, faster, better, cheaper, unitary model, one-brand model as opposed to multi-brand. In terms of the biggest sort of disruption, or maybe it was a rule break, was that we executed at WPP 2 major hostile takeovers. And hostiles in a people business, the conventional wisdom is that the assets go up and down in the lift and in and out of the office every day, and therefore how can you do something that is hostile? What people don't understand, and you see it in the fashion industry. There was a documentary about Bernard Arnault and Francois Pinault. I think it's on the BBC iPlayer. If anybody, it's 2 or 3 hours. It's worth watching. What Arnault understands is the strength of the brand. It doesn't matter who the creative director is. You know, Lagerfeld at Chanel, Tom Ford at Tom Ford, whatever it is. It's the strength of the brand that is important. In the case of agencies, again, it's J. Walter Thompson was a venerable operation. Again, it was a hostile. Ogilvy was venerable, been in the business for 50, 75, 100 years. And what people have to understand is that global brands have tremendous strength and connection. And it's not about the individual. The brand is much more powerful. And in fact, a hostile takeover, it was a famous pirate, actually, an investment pirate, asset stripper maybe would be a way of describing, called Jimmy Goldsmith, James Goldsmith. And he always said, a hostile takeover is not hostile, it's only hostile to one person, that's the CEO of the target company. So I think that would be the area that I would say pick out.
Patrick.
Well, I think for me, and the rule here is conventional thinking, I guess. And all 3 or 4 of us, I mean, in every day what we do, and we're trying to disrupt the traditional conventional thinking. So recently I spent a couple of days and stayed at a very famous chef's house in Massimo Bottura in Italy, and we stayed in his house, so he cooked the breakfast, lunch, and dinner and for us. And you know, in the world of cuisine, we have Japanese cuisine, Chinese cuisine, Italian cuisine, Latin American cuisine, but there's also something called fusion. If you're the best chef, you have to figure out where the good ingredients are, and then with your imagination, and you're trying to cook something, not just to be fancy, but also palatable to your customers who are going to taste your dishes. I think all 3 of us, and I think we're in that world. We look at the world, we see a lot of times there are just dislocations. And unfortunately, that becomes some sort of conventional thinking. Today, if you look at the media and people talk way too much about geopolitics, of course, geopolitics is the most serious issue we're all faced with. But somehow that's also having such a overweight influence on everybody's mindset. And only until like 4 or 5 years ago, people were still embracing globalization. Now people said, okay, I'm just modeling this thing, and the world is going to be doomed for anybody who's going to talk about globalization. So talking about the real action I took recently, that was just 3 weeks ago. I brought 20 Chinese CEOs, so BYD, Xiaomi, and all these guys, and they came with me. They're all private entrepreneurs. They're the best in the world for whatever they do. We showed up in Europe. So we met 110 European CEOs. The Chinese side, in terms of market cap, represent about 2 trillion RMB. The European side was 2 trillion euros. And also all the investors that showed up represent about 20 trillion US dollars under management. So 3 groups met over the course of 8 days and 58 events. What happened? Nobody was expecting this thing is going to have a big impact on how they think about everything. But when you are under the same roof, it's like 4 of us having a real conversation with everybody, and you start to look at that person, that's a real person, that's a very smart person. There's so much I can learn from this person, and can we do something together? So I think in this very much divided world, and being someone who's trying to, I guess, breaking the rules, is you do something with the action, and you let smart people meet, and we come up with good stuff. So that's also Marcelo and I were talking about this, and before coming on the stage, I think it's important. And the good ingredients, they're just scattered in different parts of the world. The Europeans are looking at China, no longer just looking at China as big market. They also look at China for access to supply chain technologies. They think the Chinese are the best today.
Great. I mean, we're sitting on the stage with some of the most global operators and investors out there. Walking back a little bit from geopolitics, which seems to be so much at the forefront of conversation, but really talking about those underlying megatrends, right, that are actually probably more important than the short term in terms of what's happening geopolitically. Maybe, Marcelo, we can start with you, and you can talk about, I know we've had discussions about longevity and aging and how that's really going to change things at a very fundamental level for society and for business.
Great, thank you. So before we talk about rule breakers, and he's going to get mad at me, probably a big rule breaker that I have here in my friend Richard Atias, who took the risk of bringing this conference to Brazil. And we were 6 months ago basically saying, should we do Brazil? It carries a high level of risk. And I haven't had a chance to thank him for taking this leap of faith, so thank you, Richard. And I do truly appreciate that. Now let's talk about the big mega trends that are happening today, right? I have 3 big passions in my life. One is AI and what is AI can do. Second is the world of football. And in this case, what can AI do in the world of football? And third is Latin America. And I try to combine them because I love those 3 things. Specifically in the world of longevity, we're living 2 very interesting points. I mean, you have an exciting world in the demographic transition that we're living in the global south, right? You have Africa, you have Saudi Arabia, in Africa, Nigeria, you got Brazil, in which you have a very young and vibrant population that reminds me a lot to the China that we knew 10 years ago. And you see it, you see the vibrancy and all that, and you see the more mature economies, you see the US, you have Europe, you have China, you have Japan, who now have a problem because the aging population keeps on growing. And for the first time in history, we have more people that are over 65 years old than under 5 years old. So that can bring a whole set of new challenges or new opportunities. I like opportunities in the world of investing because we got to develop new products that are going to cater to this aging population. At the same time, you got to deal with the global south that feels like China and India, etc. So I said a lot of exciting things. What I love is what can AI do? What happens when biology and technology get combined? Like, what can we expect? And there's a lot of fascinating things. I mean, if you look at the cost of genome sequencing, it is going down tremendously, at a tremendous amount of speed and cost. And what is that going to allow us to do? It's going to allow us to recreate the human body in the next 3 to 5 years, molecule by molecule, which means we're going to have a software version of our body, and we're going to be able to test what can we do, how do we treat disease, how can we apply medicine better? And that's going to bring a tremendous amount of preventive medicine. One of the things that I'm incredibly excited today is about 2 things. One is I'm a big believer that in the next 1 to 2 years, we're going to have the first set of vaccines for cancer. Cancer kills so many people. I don't think there's a single person in this room who hasn't had a relative who have not died of cancer. And that's going to be huge because we're going to be able to understand what is the cancer that you have and be able to send you a vaccine that has been proven on software that's going to be sent to you and is going to be able to cure cancer. That's one. Then the miracle drugs, Ozempic, Mounjaro, and all the GLP-1s are, for the first time in the history of the United States, Walmart said that the sales of food have started to slow down. They have gone down. And only 8% of the US population has access to this type of drugs. Imagine once these drugs become prevalent, and if you walk in the US, you will see that the rate of obesity is so large. And obviously, obesity leads to cardiovascular disease, and you have a tremendous amount of people that are dying because of that. So I'm a huge believer and huge proponent that those drugs, once they become a pill, are basically going to bend the obesity curve in the US. That for all of you who, I had a chance to go to Disney World a couple of weeks ago, take my kids, and I sat down, and about 80% of the people that you see walking by you are obese. And that's a problem, not because there's a problem with being obese, but it actually affects your heart. So that is a huge problem that I see that's going to basically change. And I think another huge advance that we're seeing in biotech is the ability to recreate organs. The ability today, whether you have the ability that we're going to be able to recreate a liver, a heart, a knee, and all that, and we're sort of going to be like used cars. When something is bad, you're going to be able...
Can I take you up on that? Can I take you up on that? So I had a conversation with a NASA space engineer in Dublin, of all places, about 10 days ago, exactly on the digital twin thing. And he was talking about the ability to reproduce my body. I mean, I suffered from cancer last year, and I had 6 months of chemotherapy, so I know personally, apart from my father, my grandmother, my lawyer, who've all died from cancer, so I've been intimately involved in that, and you're right about the solutions. But the digital twin will enable you to analyze your body now, and it will do one other thing, which is really interesting. It will be able to forecast if you carry on living the way you are as to what happened. You know, I have type 2 diabetes as well, and how do you do? I take the weight loss drug. That actually has
you look very good, by the way.
Yeah, but that has an impact on your kidneys as well. It improves the efficiency of your kidneys. But the point of that conversation was, he said, you're going to live till you're 120. And that's where the real problem starts to work. Because he said also, Henry Ford created the 5-day working week. They go back to the 1920s. Today, you know, there's been a linear progression in that. COVID accelerated, I think, the attitudes to work and work from home, work from anywhere. And obviously technology, the internet, and now AI in particular, quite apart from quantum and blockchain and everything else, and metaverse, are going to accelerate working from home, working from anywhere. What are we going to do for the, you know, if the average life expectancy is now 80 years or even less, and we're going to live to 120, what are we going to do? And I think that's the I mean, this is a theoretical existential issue, but that's the real issue. John Maynard Keynes, just one finally, wrote in 1933 a treatise around, after the general theory, about the effect of automation on employment. And he said automation would mean we'd have more holidays. We're going to have, my view, AI, tremendous benefits like in healthcare, but some real existential issues about work-life balance, and the things around it. So I think it's a very complex issue.
We are in an incredible race of adapting, right? And I'll let you finish your thought. There's one philosophy that says by 2045, death will be an option, which means if we're alive by that time, you know, we're going to be able to choose whether we want to die or not. And that's, so just think of the consequences as it relates to that. So I am a huge believer that all of our kids, right, are going to be able to live in excess. We're going to create the first Centauros population where the life expectancy is going to exceed the 100 years. And then I will...
You know what, I mean, and a couple of years ago, I heard you talk about this, and I took it very seriously. And, you know, most of us think the rule today is, you know, when you're 60 years old, you're old, and so you're going to retire. But that's like, in the old days, people are only going to live to 70 years old. 6 divided by 7, that's about 85%. So I think in the new era, when you can live to 100 years old, you have to think about, can I be productive until 85? I have a role model right here. And so Richard is a close friend, and he just always not just busy, just extremely busy. He calls himself a robot. I call him a bulldozer. And I think it's just how much intensity there is in your life. You're creating something new every day with all the hard work you put it in. You're changing the world. You're making a big impact. That's a model we should all learn from. I mean, there's a lot I want to learn from you. And I think, how can we make our life, if you got 25 years, extra years in your life, and make that productive? And people always talk about, and the future lies in the hands of the youth, of course. But if all of a sudden the world's, you know, the population, especially for most of us who are in this audience, you've done a lot of things great in your life, and all of a sudden you got 25 years, bonus time, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a lot of interesting stuff going to come out of this. It's health, but it's also with 25 extra years. How much more productivity you potentially can bring to this world?
Getting back to the highlights of this session, I mean, the interesting thing about that, in our industry, in the advertising and marketing services industry, which probably employs, I don't know, I was going to say, let's say 500,000 people. There will not be 500,000 people employed in our industry in 3 years' time, 4 years' time. It will be significantly less. And the redeployment, retraining, the outputs that we get as a result of AI will be much better than the outputs we get currently, and the human beings will be able to interpret them in much more effective and efficient ways, for example, in media planning and buying, but there are going to be fewer of them. And this issue of work-life balance, what we do with longevity, I think is a huge
So
issue.
the way I look at AI is, and I'll give you my vision of AI, right? When you look at the internet, what happened? Basically, the cost of information went down to zero. The browser got invented and all that. And what really got disrupted? This man's business, right? The advertising industry completely. Martin Sorrell went digital, right? That's what really happened. You have Facebook, Google, and all that. Traditional advertisers basically are out of business. And then e-commerce basically came in and disrupted retail, but nothing else changed. Look at the world. The way we treat patients is the exact same thing. The way we educate our kids is the same as the 1800s. The way we manage logistics, nothing really changed. And the beauty of the AI revolution, what I call, is that all these other industries that were untouched are going to be completely disrupted. And why? Because the internet basically moved the cost of information to zero. What is expected of AI are three things are going to go down to zero: the cost of cognition, the cost of creativity, and the cost of problem solving. And why do we hire employees? We hire them to be creative, we hire them to think, and we hire them to problem solve. So what we're about to experience, I think the world has been very lucky in terms of we have adapted to every single previous revolution. And I think this one is the one that has the ability. And if you look at some studies, it says that potentially 44% of people in the next 5 years, their job is going to be eliminated, or they're going to have to find a new job. And if the promise of AI actually comes true, whether it happens in 3 years, 5 or 7 years, this is the first time where
but
we will
the
replace...
thing I'd add to that is transparency. The power that AI unlocks is transparency. You know, I somewhat pretentiously call it the democratization of knowledge. But with AI, we will expose inside a company. We already see it with NVIDIA, and we've touched on this before in other sessions. You see a transparency of information that enables you to flatten and elongate spans of control.
Yeah.
And transparency in the systems. You know, for example, in our industry, if you go to Japan, Dentsu and Hakuhodo control 85, sometimes 100% of TV time, even in traditional media, and clients still don't know what the price of the spot is they buy. This will be eliminated by what AI is going to achieve in terms of spreading information.
And let me just interject quickly here, because we're running out of time here. But you know, all these mega trends, what are the implications, particularly for this region? Right, for Latin America, what can Latin America offer to the world? What are the specific implications that are going to be a little bit more salient here than elsewhere? Maybe we can start with Patrick and move back.
For quite a long time, I think people have the wrong thinking. People use labeling a lot. And end of the day, the greatest companies, for example, SHEIN, right, is one of the names you just mentioned. It's essentially a global company. You just can't put it in one camp, say this is a Chinese or Singapore or American company. And so what I'm trying to advise here for our friends in Brazil is when you try to do something new, try to do it for the world. You must have a big impact on the world. You have a lot of talents. And that's where the starting point is. Just don't do it only for your own nation. Do it for the world.
Sure, Martin.
Well, when I first came to Rio was in February of 1969, actually for Carnival. And I remember reading a book by Rostow, who's a famous economist, who had a theory around, a model around 4 stages of economic growth. And the first stage was takeoff. And I remember it went back into the history of Brazil and indeed Latin America, the explorers that landed, the economists that looked at the continent, and Brazil or Latin America was always going to take off. And as we know, in many respects, it still hasn't taken off. My view, of our 7,500 people, about a half are here in Latin America, principally in 5 Latin American countries. And I see creative capability and technological capability, and we've talked about the companies like Nubank, like Globant, like Mercado Libre, that epitomize what I'm talking about in terms of creativity and technological. And Marcelo, what he's done from an even more sort of a country, Bolivia, which we don't even more focus on as much as we should do. So I think what is going to be unleashed is the potential, and Marcelo mentioned the youth profile here, as opposed to the age profile. I mean, one of the projections for China, by the way, is there are 1.2 billion people today. By the end of this century, because of the decline in the birth rate, will be about 740 million. These challenges, and we see it in Russia as well, these challenges to the age composition unleash a huge opportunity in Latin America. So the growth of technology, the fragmentation of the world, which we've touched on in previous sessions, these, I think what we're about to witness is the unleashing of the creativity and technological potential of this continent. So my hope is, and my view is, that we'll see an even more vibrant Latin America. But by the way, one final point on it. If I was trying to run a country here, whether it be Brazil or any other country, I would play both ends off against the middle, i.e., I would be seeking to get the best deal for my country in a world that is increasingly fragmented. I would play off the West against the East. I would engage with the Chinese. I would engage with the Americans. I would have some doubts, I have to say, engaging with the Russians, but I certainly would engage with those two forces, because those are the forces that are going to be, whether we like it or not, increasingly competitive in the world.
Yes.
Finish?
Yep.
So
Quickly, Marcelo.
I think Latin America will contribute to the world of AI in something that is super important, and that is energy. You know, Latin America today is this country, Brazil, is a large producer of hydro, produces more excess energy than what it takes, and there's no reason why the whole world needs more clean energy to power that. And what Latin America is going to take, I look at AI as a great equalizer, and we're going to be able to bridge the tremendous divide that we have in education and the tremendous divide that we have in healthcare in comparison to emerging markets like Brazil, to mature markets, because we're going to be able to bring AI to solve the educational problems of this region and the healthcare issues. So we'll provide the energy to power AI, and we're going to be able to take the technology to equalize this huge difference that we have with mature markets.
Closing the loop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.